Good evening and welcome to the event Unmasking Difference, Literary Voices from Behind the Mask. This is the first live stream in a two-part event. There will be another session on Wednesday, same time. My name is Lara Gross and I work at the Literary Colloquium Berlin. For those of you who joined this live stream from abroad and haven't had the chance to pay a visit to the LCB is a venue for different kinds of events, mainly readings, book launches, and open-air festivals, but it's also a workspace and a guest house. That means the LCB is not just an event forum. It's not just about the end product, so to say. It's also about the process, the whole making of a book, about supporting the process in its entirety by offering conferences, workshops, and guest rooms to both authors and translators. We usually welcome up to 70 authors per year in our guest house, but this year things have been a little different. Our guest house remained closed for most of the year. We reopened it briefly for a couple of months in autumn, but now the rooms are empty again. So we tried to adapt to this new situation because just waiting it out didn't really seem like the best strategy. And we decided to develop a more contemporary digital format for our residency programs. We haven't been alone on this journey. We've had a great curator by our side, the author, lecturer, and academic activist Natasha A. Kelly. Together with Natasha, we invited 6 authors. 3 of them are here with us tonight. Those 6 authors are the first authors to participate in our newly found web residency. Logan February, Precious Colette Kemigisha, Olumide Popoola, Jamila Ribeiro, Jefferson Tenorio, and Cherie Renee Thomas. Thank you all very, very much for undertaking this experiment and for exploring the realm of web residencies with us. You have already contributed very rich and inspiring essays to this program, and I'm very curious to see where tonight's discussions will take us. I want to take this opportunity to also thank the Federal Foreign Ministry for supporting this project and for being open to new formats. And of course, Natasha, I want to thank you for your dedication, your contributions, and your commitment to this project. It's been already a very inspiring process, and we are still at the beginning. So let me introduce you to the audience. Natasha has a PhD in communication studies and sociology with a research focus on colonialism and feminism. Natasha was born in the UK and grew up in Germany. She has taught at numerous universities in Germany and Austria. As a research assistant at the Center of Transdisciplinary Gender Studies at the Humboldt University here in Berlin, she has dealt with the decoloniality of knowledge, power, and beings. On top of the academic rigor, Natasha brings a praxis of curating and directing. In her publications and in her creative work, she combines theory and praxis at the intersection of academia, art, and society. Thank you once again, Natasha. I will now hand the microphone on to you.
Thank you, Lara, and welcome everybody from near and far. The advantage that the offers us is that we can reach beyond borders and reach more than we really could. So thank you for logging in. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the virtual residency. I was actually really happy when I got invited to do this residency, but really was struck by the title. They asked me to do something around the object of masks, and I guess you're all, well, we're in the global pandemic situation right now where masks are defining our everyday life. And I was already in the notion of asking myself, who are these people behind the masks? What are they holding back? What don't they get to say, what they usually would say? Or what are they? Are they in a way being silenced, or is this maybe actually an active practice of making something visible, making the act of speech become visible through this symbolic mask? And there were like many references that I found, starting here in Germany, in Berlin, where I am located right now. We have like the anti-mask league, the conspiracy theorists who believe that the mask, or that corona in itself and the whole pandemic is just made up by the state, because they want to deprive us of our constitutional rights, for freedom. It goes, which is actually absolutely contrary to the idea that if you demonstrate here in Germany, you're not allowed to wear a mask. So this is actually forbidden to. There's a legal ban on covering up at demonstrations. So all of a sudden, this contrary became visible. Things that are usually forbidden are now actually been put on us as a regulation and restriction, how to lead through this pandemic, so to say. In other European countries, like France and the UK, there's the so-called burqa ban, where a religious aspect comes in, where for the longest part, Muslima have been forbidden to wear the burqa. So contradictory to what we've been told during Corona. One of the most popular ideas of the mask, or the most well-known, well, let's say in Europe, is for sure the African mask, which I would say has been very much misinterpreted in the way that masks are presented, especially in ethnological museums, as artwork in a European way of thinking, but were not necessarily produced as works of art. And the whole idea goes on and on and on. There are several examples that came to mind when I was thinking about this idea. But what was more important to me was the contradictions that opened up when thinking about masks. And that's why I called this, my concept hovers around the idea of unmasking, more or less, where I also write unmasking with an underscore. Yeah. So literally, well, I won't say too much about it now, but I would more wait to see actually how the authors dealt with it. This idea of contradiction and this idea of differences being brought to the forefront in the physical way through this physical symbol of the mask. I was very much reminded also of W.E.B. Du Bois's veil. He described the veil. W.E.B. Du Bois, he was a African American scholar, activist, journalist, author, curator, Afrofuturist, and he used the metaphor of the veil to practically as to describe the social structure of society created through racism, and says that literally this veil hangs between the white world and the black world, but it's more something that solely exists in people's minds, from Du Bois's understanding. And the mask, looking at a mask that we literally physically wear, was for me, in a sense, also a physical manifestation of Du Bois's idea of the veil, which made the power structures become, or actually manifested power structures, manifested psychological aspects and other things you necessarily cannot see. And so I passed on this idea. 6 authors that were invited to our residency, and I'm really I'm really happy, although happy is not the right word, but as you can hear, my English is not very perfect anymore. I'm more fluent in German, so I really apologize for this. But I don't know, it was so much appreciation reading the creativity of this whole unfolded itself in their different texts. And I'm not going to say too much about the text. I really want the authors to do this themselves, and I will be inviting them one by one. Due to technical issues, it's easier that way than to have everybody here at the same time. So I'll be inviting them one by one, and then they will give us a short summary of their text, and then I have direct questions that um, that came to my mind when reading these texts that I will address to each of these authors. And during this time, you are invited to ask questions in the chat that we will then, in the final round, collect and then direct to everybody in a joint panel after all three authors have presented their work. You will have the possibility to read the long version of the text because we are publishing them, of course. Who knows me, you will know that I do not go without documenting my work. So there will be an ebook available on the 7th of December. And on this occasion, we will also be having a third virtual event where you are invited to, where this residency will only be a part of it, but we will also present the book there, and you will have the chance to download it from wherever you are. So no worries, even if you're on the other side of the ocean right now, you will also have access to this ebook to download and to read these beautiful stories, which are making me just shine from within because they were just so nice. But first of all, so keep that on your note list here to watch out for the ebook. And I would start by introducing my first guest today is Olumide Popoola. There you are. Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Great to
Hi.
have you here. No?
Yeah,
I'm going
great
to
to be here.
introduce you shortly. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm just going to hand over to you. Yeah.
All right. Great.
Okay. So Olumide is a Nigerian German writer. She publishes essays, novellas, plays, and short stories. In 2017, her debut novel, When We Speak of Nothing, was released. Olumide received her PhD in creative writing from the University of East London and subsequently taught at various universities. She is the founder and director of The Future is Back, a program for aspiring LGBTQ writers. Olumide has received various grants and awards, including from the Arts Council England and from the Künstlerdorf Schöppingen Foundation here in Germany. Yeah? And I would like to hand over to you and slowly vanish in the background.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for coming out and joining us tonight. And thanks for the invitation to LCB and also to Natasha, because I do think this is a brilliant topic. And it's a lovely way to think about masks and not to think about the pandemic and not think about the pandemic solely, but think about the world and where the world is at. And I have two submissions. One is collaborative, but this one I'm speaking is my own, my sole submission, and it's a hybrid text. So it's a short scene. So it's a creative nonfiction hybrid text. So it's a scene of in the market. So it's the creative part, and it's intersliced with quotes. Some of these quotes are from critical texts or from people speaking, so real quotes from the world. Some of these quotes are things that I have made up. They're not, that the things that I'm thinking about. And they exist on two sides. So we have the text, the story, if you will, here, and then once in a while you have an insertion, which is the quote. And the scene is as follows. We have an unnamed, ungendered narrator who's watching a scene in the market. There's a woman, a trader, who's about to pack up her wares, and another woman arrives. They hug, and then they hold each other by their arms, and they just look at each other. In a way, nothing much happened, but it's really unbearable for the narrator because it used to be going on for a very, very long time, and the narrator starts to feel constriction in their chest, their breathing gets labored, and eventually they have to run out of the market for a brief moment. So that gets sliced up, and we have the sort of intersection in there. And I was really interested in several things. First of all was I wanted to do something symbolic. That is, we don't quite know which time this is in. This could be quite a long time ago because it's a market, and I'm not giving too many specifics, clues for the reader. Or this could be something that's happening nowadays. So I was interested in time collapsing and thinking about time as a mask, this idea that we are constantly moving forward, or this idea of progress, that we're arriving somewhere better, which obviously we know if you look globally, that's very much in question. So time as a mask, and also who gets to speak, how we get to speak, who is important. I was really struck this year by social justice movements like Black Lives Matter, and then NSA's movement became prominent in Nigeria, and I didn't see the same sort of outrage and empathy, and it's really something that I have been finding very difficult to grapple with. That I felt that social justice, those of us who are really into social justice, we are not into that equally around the globe. So I'm including myself there. I don't want to just make it about others. So in this piece, I was interested in the Black body and trauma and how that sits in the body. So a lot of quotes speak to that, to how trauma manifests really minutely in the body. And it gets mirrored in that story where this person has this very mundane, trivial encounter, and that is doing something to their body. So what else did I want to... and we have boundaries that blur between life and death. So this could be something that happens and the person is already dead, because there's also this other character that the narrator has imaginary discussion with, or imaginary conversation. And in my mind, that character is in the far future, generations further ahead. And the character observing the market scene has to resolve something. And I'm trying to figure something out around circular time and the blurring of boundaries. And the healing of trauma on the Black body, which then also leads to the liberation of the Black body. So I was interested into that notion of, can we ever step out of being a Black body? Because can we ever be unmarked? Because there is that mask, or what Natasha just said about the veil. So those were my sort of thinking processes. That's it.
Thank you. Oh, there you go. Here I'm back. Duh. I have a few questions for you. Some of the things that you've already really touched were also on my mind when I was reading your text. First of all, you mentioned that it's a hybrid text, so that you work with quotes on the one hand, so very theoretical quotes also, and on the other hand, it's your creative writing, so it's your whole imagination that you put together these two very contrary genres actually. And I was asking myself how this form presented itself to you. How did you even come about choosing these two so very different fields and putting them together?
That's a very good question. I'll have to find somebody to answer that. I can't remember how it came about. I know I presented, a proposal to you, and and I had lots of, I think, the topics that I've mentioned or the thoughts I mentioned. I was interested in working that out in the text, and when I came to write, immediately this came out like that. I had this very strong sense of this scene, which in a way by itself would be really boring, but I wanted to intersperse it with this really heavy, as you said, heavy text or these statements. I think it's the title, because the title is Contractions. And, it comes and goes. And so contraction is something that's very intense and then it relaxes, right? So it comes and gives. And as soon as I started, I thought, yeah, this is really something to work with. I think it fits the ideas. Oh, you tell me.
It does. I think it fit also. Well, I was just curious because for me, it's also important, being a writer and an author myself. I think the process of writing is also very important. Like Lara mentioned at the beginning, not only the end product, but how we get from the first idea to the actual result. Is a journey also, no?
Mm-hmm.
And especially
Yeah.
in this day and age, I was like interested in maybe even how Corona influenced this process for you. Are you writing in the same way you usually would, or is it more like, have you been influenced by this whole global world situation at the moment?
Yeah, well, until September, I had almost no time to write just because childcare. And so, that's the immediate one. And since then, my daughter's going to school. So I'm only mentioning that because it's not been super long that I've been able to concentrate fully into projects. I think Corona, yes, but also a lot is really Black Lives Matter. I was very, very much affected after the murder of George Floyd, and I think this idea of trauma and the body and what that sort of means, that's been a topic for me for a while, to look at that also in writing, in creative writing. And then the BLM uprising started against the backdrop of the pandemic. So I think that is really is that. And as you said, and those demonstrations, like I couldn't believe it in Germany. I mean, how many thousands are on the street and very
Yeah.
happy to march with fascists. And I think that is that. It's just that's what gets me, that the lines are completely blurred and you think, yeah, I don't understand anymore what time we're in. I think everything has gone on the window. So for my writing, I think it has to be much sharper than usual. So this playing about, I mean, creative play, yes, creative play to find something, but I want to be much sharper and much clearer. And hence this idea of, no, we're not worth the same. We know this we know this about Corona. I don't know how it is in Germany, but here, Black and brown people die much more of Corona, and there are various reasons for that. So I think I want to be speaking to these kinds of things. I don't know how different that is, because normally that would interest me too. But, yeah.
The underscore in my title, Unmasking Difference, stands for many in-between spaces, for gaps, for cracks, for intersections, but also for actions and processes, for time lapses. Where does this reflect itself in your story?
So the marketplace in Yoruba tradition and mythology is a liminal space. It's a sort of a space where I see this whole thing as a metaphor of in between death and life, or maybe also both. So I like what you see, intersections where a lot of things get played out, but what is actually real and what is some put out. And was sort of my response to that. I think very, very quickly this idea of looking at what being dead could mean in relation to time. And that's why the lapses. So we're having two different times. I started actually writing in a way as if, so the narrator is speaking about the future as if that has already happened, because it was also happening, but it found it too confusing, so I changed it. So it, on surface it looks like it's a linear time, but initially it was conceived at these time lapses, and yeah, grammatically that was quite interesting as well, but a bit confusing.
I also had the impression that your narrator was actually doing time jumps. Maybe I've been watching too much science fiction, but it was also
Yeah.
this idea of the person hopping through the market. Maybe only the observation made me feel that, but it also could have been the person moving in this speed through the market.
Yeah, that could be.
That was just an idea. Mm-hmm.
Because that was the idea, not so much in the market, but there was that conversation between the narrator and this other character who we don't get to meet. And that was definitely a time jump. So they're presenting it as if that conversation was yesterday, but in a way that conversation would have been in the far future. But he's remembering it backwards. But you see, even my vocabulary is a bit restricted because you can't remember something that has not yet happened. And I think it would be interesting concept. I think it was more the time that you really have to think about your language and where you want to, because I know this then, because it's my concept, but if you come to it fresh, how will you understand anything in there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My last question, which you touched on before we hear, we're going to hear you again. You mentioned your collaborative piece that you have with Logan, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that in a minute. But talking about writing as a form of liberation, I think this is something that is very usual, especially in Black feminist theory. But what about writing as the form of visualization? Not only liberation, but also visualization. Because I was thinking of the veil as something that only exists in your mind, but the mask that is very there and it's very physical, it's very, very visible. How does that relate to your writing, to your process, to the story, or maybe even something that took place in your story that you would say, yeah, this is a point where I would actually say that happened.
Yeah, I think is a symbolic visualizing of several things, some of which I still have to hone down a little bit. So so there is a scene where the narrator watches the dust going up into air and is really zooming in, which is not possible from their vantage point. But I thought, again, it was something as the reflections around life, your position in life, your position in society. So in a way, I was trying to find very simple metaphors. I don't know if that answers your question. Otherwise, you have to ask me again in a different way.
I'm just going to leave it at that because I really want to get the people really nosy about reading it themselves. Yeah. Because this is obvious personal interpretation and the way I read your text. But I would leave it open for everybody, not to put too much analysis in it at this point, but really to leave it open and invite people to read it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for now. We're going to hear back from you in a minute. You're welcome. Thank you. I would like to introduce my second guest for today. My second guest is calling from Nigeria, and I very much hope that our connection will not let us go till the end of the show tonight. Logan February. Hello, Logan. Let me introduce you. Logan February is a non-binary lyric poet and songwriter from Nigeria. February is studying creative writing at Purdue University. Am I pronouncing that right? I'm not sure. Is it Purdue University?
I think it's Purdue. It's Purdue.
Oh, Purdue. Oh, sorry. I was like Purdue. It's like two words. Purdue University. Where is Purdue University? In Nigeria?
No, it's in Lafayette, Indiana, in the U.S.
Okay. Okay. Wrong continent, Natasha. Okay. And has been published in various magazines, including The Guardian Life, Dazed, The Rumpus, Lambda Literary, Washington Square Review, and in Africa Ilog. February has been nominated for the Silliman First Book Prize for African Poets for 3 volumes of poetry and the collection Manica in the Nude. In 2019 and 2021, it will be published, if I have the correct information. Yeah. Welcome, Logan. I'm looking forward to maybe a short summary of your piece first before I dive into this. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. This is really, really awesome to finally be here and talking about this. And I feel like the virtual residency is just the future, so it's exciting. It's exciting to be part of this. My piece, my solo piece that I've worked on at the residency is a fragmented lyric essay. It currently doesn't really have a title. It has this working epigraph that I'm using. Just it's a quote by Akweke Emezi from the Dazed article, and it goes, "You wear the mask, you are the thing." So basically, my concept is to think about embodiment as a kind of masking, and in thinking about the mask, then it's like questioning the nature of performance, questioning how much of being and how much of persona and who we are is actually a performance. And that also brings in the question of the audience, brings in the question of like, do you have to be perceived in a certain way to be a certain thing, or for your performance to be complete? And so because I was thinking about this and I was thinking about performance, and of course because of the body, I was thinking about gender. So I basically braided style. Sorry. I feel like the internet just cut off for a bit. No, so I've had this braided style where I write about theater, and I write about a play by Bertolt Brecht. I hope I'm pronouncing the German correctly. And it's his play, The Good Woman of Szechuan. And based off of that, I'm basically just contemplating a whole bunch of ideas together. Brecht and the Good Woman, and this duality of male, female, and the duality of goodness and evil, for lack of a better word. And also like playing with that and talking about, because when we talked about the concept, we talked about contradictions a lot. So one contradiction or one sort of liminal concept I always think about is Jung's theory of anima and animus. The animus is supposed to be this inner feminine side of a man, and that's the anima. And the animus is the inner masculine element of a woman. And although it's like this binary concept, Jung's idea of the self in its final state is this properly integrated force that brings together all of these elements, so you can have this whole harmonious, total idea of self. And so because of that, I was thinking about, well, a brief side note. In the play, there's this character who is a good woman named Shante, and her goodness gets her in trouble, essentially. She's too good, and people take advantage of it because people live in poverty and so on. And because of that, she creates this alter ego who is a male version, who is supposed to be her cousin, but it's actually just her wearing a mask. But the interesting thing that happens is when she wears the mask, she becomes Shuita, this other persona, and is not such a good person, despite being the good woman of the title. So I was very interested in that. I was very interested in the idea of having your body be perceived in a different way, and because of that, you can have a whole different performance. I think those were the thoughts that I had going into this piece.
Fantastic. And I, of course, was fascinated, first of all, to learn that you used Bertolt Brecht. Of course, I asked you about that. All the way down in Nigeria, how did Mr. Brecht get down there? How did this? Why this? Why this text? Why this piece? This is what fascinated me, first of all.
Why this piece? I think that, well, I'm always interested in theater. I'm always interested in all forms of writing outside of poetry because I'm interested in sort of like deconstructing the form. So my friend is a theater major and he had a bunch of plays, and I just got back from this trip and I have this like borderline agoraphobia where I don't want to go anywhere. So all I choose to do is just sit indoors and read. And what I was reading was this play, The Good Woman of Szechuan. And while reading it, I was just thinking about this psychoanalytic theory that had been on my mind because I've been thinking about gender for a while. And then I was just like, oh my God, this is really like animus possession in action in this play. So my goal or my mission was to try to take this element of theory and take this element of theater and like see what I can come up with by thinking of them together.
And is this what you how you see, for the people who don't know Brecht's play? This is Bertolt Brecht, well, very famous German. He also did. He's a playwright, and I think what I found most interesting in your text, or the way you wove it into the text, is also how Brecht was translated, how the title of the play was translated, because this also is very interweaves with all that you're saying and all that you're portraying in your. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I translation is something that is this sort of like sacred conundrum to me. Like it's super amazing, but I feel like it's fraught with its own set of it's like a minefield. So I mean, I was reading Brecht in English, so I just had to consider that. And then when I saw that there were sort of like, first of all, the gender of this character is implicated even in the title.
Yeah.
But it was interesting
Which is
to
not
know that
in the German version, right? This is not the case in the German version. Yeah, this is what I wanted to get at. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the German is sort of void of gender. And so in thinking about that, then I saw people who had translated this play as the good person or the good soul. And I'm a person who identifies as a person more so than a man or a woman. So I was like drawn to that question and just being like, okay, what does this say about this bigger question that I have?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I would like to give you a hint on that, because in German it's called Der gute Mensch von Szechuan, yeah, and Mensch would translate to human being, yeah, but the Mensch in German, this word is used in a very masculine way, actually. So when you talk about Mensch, you're actually talking about the man, the white man, which is equals the human being. So even in this title, is totally turned on its head, because I think the title in German is very masculine, whereas the English translation is The Good Woman. It's one. Yeah. So this whole idea is put on its head. I'm not sure if you do German, but it's actually very contrary to how it's been translated. This is what I noticed straight away. No, because I do translations as well. I was like, oh, that's interesting. They use the woman, although they use the human being, which in a Eurocentric setting is actually male, white, cis, and so on. No, so it's not directly indicated, but it's in there as well. Which role does time play, and especially space? Because you mentioned escaping inwards, and I love this expression. Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, space more so than time. I don't really see this piece messing with time so much, except that it's playing with concepts, and it played that from like decades before I was even born. But beyond that, I feel like there's this sort of like timelessness of ideas, like the worth of a good idea is that you can come back to it anytime and have a good time thinking about it. But in terms of space, I like being in Lagos right now, or especially a month ago when I started to work on this. It was kind of tough. We've been having these issues with police and police violence, harassment, brutality. And so for me, my reaction to that was this sort of neurotic fear of like, I don't want to go outside, I don't want to step out on the street, I don't want to do anything. So I will just read and I will just write because like that's my job anyway. So that I think that really played a role in the escaping inwards. And then it's like why I've come up with this essay that's so cerebral. It's so idea driven. And even though it's about the body, I find that fascinating now that I think about it.
And if I may quote you again, yeah? At the end of your text, you ask, quote, if the body is a mask, what is the performance? And I wanted to give this question back to you because I thought, who better could answer this than you? No? How would you answer the question yourself?
Well, okay, so this has to factor in my thoughts on performance themselves, and which was I thought was interesting to distinguish from theater. Because when I think of performance art, I think of a very immersive, sometimes extreme acts of willpower, and they're meant to be witnessed by an audience, right? So in transposing that idea of performance onto that question, I don't know. I feel like I realized thinking about this piece that my question was about persona. And so I feel like when you switch through persona, you get to switch performances. You get to play a different role when you have the mask on and when you have the mask off. So what is the performance? I don't know. I think that's even in at the end of that paragraph, there's a question that says maybe the performance is like trying to be this thing that the body is, or maybe the performance is trying to break out of that, or maybe the performance is somewhere in between, and it's the performance itself is a failed experiment because you can't really accomplish it in your body. I'm not sure. You know, that's one of the things I love about writing a piece like this. It's not really seeking after an answer. It's more about blowing up the dust of these questions and seeing what the mind comes up with.
Wow, thank you. We're going to hear you in a little piece, which I also found, I don't know, I don't even have a right word. Fabulous is underestimated, I think. But we'll talk again later. Yeah.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I would thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha.
You're welcome. I would like to remind the audience that you still have the chance to write your questions in the chat. Do so. We will be having an answer where all of us meet in roughly 10 minutes from now, where you can, where we will then read your questions, and it would help if you write who your question is directed to. So if you want to put in brackets, oh, then my question is to Olumide or to Logan or to the beautiful Precious who are introduced now. I hope. Calling Uganda. Are you there? Oh no. I'm just hearing that we have a technical disconnect and are not reaching Precious in Uganda right now. Huge pity. Maybe we can figure something out for Wednesday. I will then invite Logan and Olumide back. There you go. It's beautiful to see you again, quicker than expected. Unfortunately, we can't get through to Precious, but let me still introduce Precious, though. unfortunately here, but Precious has been working as an editor, creative writing tutor, and ghostwriter in Uganda for over 15 years. Her interest in science fiction and fantasy, especially Afrofuturism, resulted in publications in several anthologies and enabled her to explore various topics such as social inequality, race, and gender. She currently teaches creative writing and is putting together her own collection of weird and wonderful short stories for 2021. Precious Piece also deals with Ugandan culture, but I'm not going to say too much about it. I hope that we can be able to talk to her on Wednesday. She's here?
She's here now, I think.
Precious? Can you hear me, Precious? Can you hear me? Your microphone is off. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Oh no. Okay, I'm really sorry. Maybe we can work this out for Wednesday. That would be good. And let's just move on for now. Olumide and Logan, you both wrote a collaborative piece, which I was also really, really happy about. Took the time to do it in these peculiar times that we're in right now, and yeah, well, maybe I don't want to say too much. Maybe you two want to introduce or present what this piece is about first. I will vanish back in the background and leave the virtual floor to you.
Yeah, I think our idea to collaborate sprang from the introduction when we all first met. And Natasha, you gave us your notes on your ideas around this idea of unmasking and the idea of a Gelede festival, or the mask during a Gelede festival, which is a traditional Nigerian Yoruba festival, came up. And Logan and I thought, oh, maybe this is something we could look at together, this idea of gender and the masking of gender. And Logan, if you don't mind, just continue and then you say my bit and then you can jump in. And so this was on the 19th of October, and I'm just saying that because we had this idea to collaborate to Black queer bodies in a different space, and then on the 20th of October, the Lekki massacre happened. Lekki is a part in Nigeria, and I'm going to let Logan speak to that more because you were on the ground. But then our angle turned very much to a conversation around that and to talking to each other. So we have a text that is in 3 acts. The first is the email or letter exchange where we're speaking directly to each other. It's a bit obviously edited and stylized. The second part is a virtual Gelede festival where we took some of the elements of Gelede and worked on them and made our own festival on the page. And the third is our visual contribution. And before I just talk, I'll let you say something and then I can come back in.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say now. No, I was talking to you. So, Lekki, right? Basically, the day after we had the first introduction, there had been a bunch of protests against police brutality in Lagos. and around the world. And it was gathering momentum, and it was this big cultural moment where it's like, oh wow, the youths are rising up and asking for their rights, and the government has to have a response. And I don't think we were very ready for the kind of government that we have and the kind of response that they made. So on the evening of the 20th, they basically the military was sent to the protesters who were being absolutely peaceful, who were waving their flags and singing the national anthem, and they opened fire on them, and then it just like everything changed and everything just took this really dark turn. And Olumide and I were thinking about that a lot at the time of, like, we were just at the email stage, so it just naturally creeped in and then became almost like the center of our discussion. And then it made sense to go with Gelede, because Gelede it's about like offering this sense of relief to a society that has a lot of problems, and it's about coming together to say, okay, how do we like think through the problems that we're having in our society, and how do we come up with a useful solution? How do we know what kind of conduct is not permissible? And so that was really the inspiration too. And then also because we're doing this residency virtually, so it's just like, oh, this could be a cool opportunity to sort of like script a virtual festival or something that would be indigenous, but it's changing its shape all the time anyway. So hopefully this, I mean, I don't know, maybe this will be something that might be applicable in a more practical, real sense in the future.
And it was quite interesting because we did a lot of research around Gelede, and then I think both of us were a little bit disappointed because it was not as interesting gender-wise as we first thought. So one of the things that I noticed is that, okay, this is a festival where the Great Mother as a spiritual being, and also the spiritual powers of women are celebrated, while there are also these other aspects that Logan mentioned. Yet the women have a very background role in all of this. It's the men who do the performing, who do the dancing, and they're wearing masks with veils and exaggerated breasts and etc. I thought this is really interesting. This is about women, and yet women are probably cooking the food, doing all the work, and somehow in the background. So that was also interesting. That this was like almost. And if there's any experts here, you come back and you chastise me. That's okay. But it was almost like a little pat. Here you go. It's nice. So you know. So I didn't feel very. It didn't feel maybe as feminist as I initially maybe expected it. But of course, it's not true, because the great, women are celebrated and the Great Mother is celebrated, and sort of this. But it was a very interesting process.
But if I can just my way a little bit to ask something, because I actually thought this comparison of the end SARS demonstration tied together or put in contrast to the Gelede, is that how I pronounce it correctly, was actually very that's what made the Gelede very feminine, because I envisioned the ENSARS as something militant, something rough, and something very masculine, where this whole feminine idea of the Gelede grew out even stronger than what you're presenting. For me, this was my perception of it. Was this intent, or was this just a coincidence, or is this just Natasha Kelly reading?
No, I guess also because of the act where the Gelede Festival takes place, we framed it with with a youngish woman, and I think that also makes you feel very feminine. Whereas, we centered it around her gaze, so we put the gaze on her rather than, we have the songs of the main performers, and the main performers are very traditional, so the names are very traditional, but not so much the songs. The songs are, they're satires, I think, and very sharp. But the centering on her as this person that we see the festival, I think that's an adaptation to how the festival would maybe run. Because normally maybe it would also be elder women, and it starts with an older woman, but then it goes to this and that. I think for me that was very deliberate. deliberate, because I really struggled to even find with women even in the background.
Where do you see the actual idea of unmasking difference come in?
So I think I have one thing that I wrote down here is, how do we sit in the landscape of our tradition and traditions? So the third part, I think, is this idea where we mask up to certain things that we're also performing. So I put on traditional Yoruba clothes and I took some pictures that I hoped could sort of pass for pictures that somebody could have taken in the 50s or 60s during a festival. But I named myself not the great mother, but the queer mother, because I am queer and a mother. But also these clothes I do wear when I go to Nigeria, but they're also sort of not my immediate there's not what I normally wear. And there's this sort of question, what is the diaspora and what is my role towards this tradition? And again, it's about, for me, that unmasking, maybe not unmasking, but that gap in between, the underscore. So that liminal space where I insert myself. And the most important part for me was almost the naming of the third act, which there's like the body, the gate, and our underscore selves. So I have different selves, but I'm turning the gaze away, and that's the unmasking. And I don't know if Logan did the same for their content there and the third part.
I would hand over to you, Logan.
Yeah. And thinking about the unmasking, I think I like Olumide also really keyed into the underscore and the idea of that space between, because a lot of our approach to this piece was sort of like deconstructing our mediums and deconstructing our forms and trying to have this dialogue across our age brackets and across where we are in the world and across our sort of facets of experience. So in a way, it's like, to me, the masking question here is really like, what does it mean to be a Nigerian, and what does it mean to be a Black queer person? What does it mean to be a queer Nigerian? Because those realities, they take on different nuances for me here in Lagos and for Olumide in London. So I just feel like there's a sense of the thing being the same but being placed in a different context, and then everything changes. So I think that's definitely an influence of, and then of course, because the mask itself, the performance in Gelede is really these masked figures, and the practice with the masked figures is fascinating because they are regarded by everyone as completely different personas. So these characters that we've created are these they come and they air your secrets. They basically air your dirty laundry. But in the traditional context of the festival, you can't go after the festival and be like, hey, why did you tell someone I was cheating on my wife or something? You have to respect that this masked figure said that, and not the person in the mask. So there is a sense of separation. It's like once you wear the mask, you do become the Gelede, you become the Oroefe, and you just have to do your thing.
Is there also like a line between, or a connection between fact and fiction in your piece? That's what I was also reading. Fiction in the Yoruba mythology, but these facts, these hard facts of maybe the SARS, your email communication at the beginning as the intro, so to say, of your, and then the fiction, the fictive idea of jumping into this figure and the whole mythology that comes up in it. Describe it like a very Eurocentric way. I'm sorry, apologize for my school there, but this is what came to mind when I was reading your. It be
Well, I wouldn't.
that far
Really,
from it. Maybe I'm.
You
Okay,
start.
I was saying. Okay. I don't think of it so much as fiction as there is a sense of characterization and like playing a role, because the traditional festival is also supposed to be this satirical, almost like a comedy show, but for really serious topics. So for me, that's what and for me that doesn't feel fictional, because I say this thing about Nigeria all the time, where I say it's like a badly written comedy show. So it didn't really feel like fiction, and even though we might have created this, like we have directed the festival in a way that it heads a certain way, it focuses on certain characters, it brings in voices from around the world, but the core of it is really still very attached to that first act, where we're talking about all of these events and trying to, it's essentially a different approach. Rather than just complaining about it to each other like we did in the first act, we enact it and we satirize it and we try to make jest of it and to make it not as big as it seems. So I guess, I mean, that could be a question of like, is it fiction or not? But primarily, we did want to mess around with the genres and try to say, okay, we want to do something that is entertaining to the mind, but also visually interesting to look at. So those were our objectives.
Do you see it the same way, or
It was funny because I would have said yes, it's fiction. So
that's interesting. Okay, I thought it was me just there. Interesting. Go ahead. By the way, how do you?
no, but yeah, but it's the fiction in a way that relates to the very serious first act, which is about what's going, why are we affected by these issues, and that is in a way it's just I mean it's not contradictory to what you're saying. It's just I think I see it differently because we're taking liberties. That's fiction. We're basing it on something that is happening or that happened, but what we're doing with it is different, I think. Because also, I think that's that.
I also feel like there's
Okay, I'm gonna. Okay, so go ahead. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Logan.
I
Sorry.
feel like there's a metafictional element to the piece, in the sense that we have this fictional second act, and then we have the third act where we enact the things that we said we were creating in the first act, and the characters that we created for the second act. And so it feels like that question itself is a great reaction to the piece, because for me the way it was working was, I want to create this thing that isn't real and is supposed to be virtual even though it's not real, but I want to have this photo evidence that makes it feel like when you finish reading the piece you want to ask yourself, did this happen, did they actually have a festival? So it's just kind of blur the lines of reality, or I think that was what was going for.
I really want to invite the viewers to read the piece and also see the images that all tell us part of the piece. I forgot to mention that actually, but you did. So I'm just getting a note that Precious is now connected. I do not want to cut you too, but I'm just hoping that the connect stays so that I at least get the chance to talk to Precious. Can you hear me? But we can't see her. There, Precious, welcome. Sorry about all this technique. Sometimes technical issues are just larger than us. I already introduced you to the audience because I thought that if we don't get this connection going, that you'll definitely be back on there and with work something by then. But please go ahead and present your story, your work, your text.
Thank you very much. I've actually been listening along, and I'm very impressed and amazed, shall I say, by the work from my fellow authors. And I'm also very glad to be here. Okay, so my thought process in the essay that I wrote, which the title is The Unmasking, Exposing the Myth of the Weaker Sex in the Various Cultural Practices of Ugandan Women in the Light of Modern Day Feminism. How I arrived there was I was in a class that I was teaching, and interestingly, there were only women in that class. And it was going on for 8 weeks, writing class. And it's very interesting the intimacy that occurred during those 8 weeks, because it kind of swayed from learning about writing to talking about these intimate details of our lives, especially as concerns culture in Uganda. Now, what I noticed is that the older generation of the ladies who were in the classroom had a completely different view to the younger ladies, because the older ladies understood culture. For example, in the Chiganda culture, in Uganda we have 54 different tribes. The Buganda is the biggest tribe. That's where actually they got the name Uganda. And so that culture has permeated many of the different tribes that we have in this country. So in the Chiganda culture, they actually get a bride, for example, before she enters her home, and they teach her how to be in the home. They call it being in the home. Essentially, what they're telling her is that this is how you have to be. This is the role that you have to take. And it's not even just a role that concerns marriage. It's a role that concerns her as a woman, becoming this being that you present to the man. Now, it becomes a kind of power play, because once the man sees that the not even the woman herself, the presentation of herself being weak, then he kind of loosens up, and there's power that is released for the woman in the household. And the younger women were saying that this is actually just a continuation of patriarchy, and this is just a continuation of subjugation of the woman. But actually, what it was is that the older culture sees that their power is not going to be handed over easily. So now these are the masks that we have to adopt in order to get this kind of power. Now, it becomes an issue of gender, whereby the male has seen as being the strong ones and having all the power, but the women actually also believe that they can wear these masks in the home, in different settings, and also take back power, as opposed to presenting themselves as they are, as the younger generation was trying to argue, presenting themselves as they are, and then being rejected and not actually gaining anything from being who they are by unmasking themselves. An interesting example of this is, for example, when a man comes home, a husband comes home, the woman is supposed to kneel down for him. The woman is supposed to call him Sebo, which is Sir, translated from Uganda. And this is some kind of, how can I say it? The act of kneeling in itself is also a mask that they wear, because she may hate the man in actual sense, but what she's trying to do is present a persona in which to be able to get some kind of leverage in this relationship. This dynamic is very well documented in one of our novelists, Ugandan novelists' book. It's called Chintu. And the interesting part of it is that Jennifer Nansubuga, who's the author of this book, she presents the pre-colonial Buganda kingdom, whereby the king mother is actually the one who has power over the throne. However, the irony is a woman cannot sit on the throne. So the presentation of male gender as having power, whereas the actual power is with the woman behind the scenes, was a very interesting dynamic that I really wanted also to look at in the essay. So I think that's where my thought process came from and how I came to write that. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you now, yes.
Sorry, but now I'm echoing. Hello? Okay, I'll ask my question again. Sorry. For some reason, I hear my echo, but I'll just go ahead. I was asking about the time and space, the idea, the intersections, the gaps, the spaces in between. I read in your also of in one way bridging the inheritance of tradition on the one hand, and the world and or the future in the feminist context in the other. Would you also see it that way, or do you see it differently? What is the in-betweenness? What is the masked and the unmasked?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. I think that yes, there is that handing down of tradition, and then there is also the adoption of traditions. So the handing down and that comes, I think, the time is generational. The difference between the time, and then there's space also of I think in my case, it's the pre-colonial era and then the post-colonial era, whereby feminism has now entered into this I don't know, this in between. So there's an adoption of the understanding of feminine power and being empowered in that sense, and then there's a disconnect between the previous understanding of feminine and of power and feminine power, especially in the pre-colonial traditions. And so there is some kind of weird intersection, especially when the older generation is trying to pass it down to the younger generation. But then there's also still that that whole, I don't know, it doesn't really connect completely. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah, that's how I saw it.
You are definitely in European feminist context, and at this point, I would like to really emphasize, especially to the audience, that there are many forms of feminism. And in the European context, feminists see obedience often as something submissive. In your analysis, you more as a masquerade or as a performance, that masquerade as a form of masking through which you can actually empower themselves. Correct?
That is very correct. And that's exactly how they pass it on, like the L generation pass it on to the younger generation. Why they say that the overt trying to take power from men, it doesn't work. And that the context with which women are put is not, it's permeable, and it's permeable through this masquerade, you see. And although men seem to understand that this is happening, there is some kind of acceptance, especially when it comes to that idea of the mother, a man really respecting his mother and upholding her and her ideas in his life, in his family. But then he can actually sometimes even disrespect his wife. But I think there's a give and take in that. But that obedience, yes, it is actually seen as empowering.
Might this be even contradicting?
I think it's very contradicting. It's very contradicting, and especially for those who are from the outside looking in, because it does look like some kind of degradation, and that's why there is a little bit of a conflict between the Western kind of feminism and what the African kind of feminism that the older generation practice, because the Western kind of feminism of being extremely assertive and trying to grab power wherever you can is not, it doesn't work in this setting. Yes, so it's very, yeah.
How would you describe this form of Africana feminism a little bit more? That's especially for viewers and listeners from Europe, to really grasp that a little bit more. What are we talking about which form? How would you describe this form of feminism in Uganda? What it might be the specificity about it?
Okay, so I think that the specificity of the feminism I'm trying to describe is specifically in a relation to, let me start with the relation to men. So now in relation to men, especially if you're in the home setting and even actually in a work setting, I don't know if anybody has ever seen our president, President Museveni, giving speeches. I don't know why you would be watching him, but anyway, if anybody has seen him, when he is being approached by women, they kneel down, you see. So, and it doesn't really matter what kind of position this woman has. They can be a vice president, and she in Uganda we had a vice president. She would kneel down when she approached the president. So you have this kind of power that you may have in an official setting, for example, in an office, which could be seen as kind of the Western feminism, whereby you're taking power in economic space, you're taking power in the political space. But there's also power to be had that is more subtle, for example, in the home spaces, more subtle when you're dealing with men in different arenas. So I think that the cultural setting, especially in Uganda, looks at those other subtle places of taking power as opposed to being just overt and public in that sense. Yeah.
Spaces might these be? You started with the conversation of the women preparing the bride. Is this one of these spaces that you're talking about in particular?
Now that space is actually very interesting because I've heard of it being spoken of as some kind of well, for the modern generation, they look at it and they say this is an indoctrination whereby you get a young girl and you say, listen, girl, you can't be like this anymore. You have to be like this now. So they kind of now put that veil on her. They put that mask on her during the ceremony before she gets into her marriage. They bring a paternal aunt to speak to her about exactly what she's supposed to do. So that space is indeed the pre-marriage space. So they're kind of molding. It's a molding. You mold her into what is expected of her. And this is the persona that she's meant to have. However, when she goes back into the space of the women, she can take off her mask, and then they start talking about the men and making fun of them. But then all the women there, the multiple generations of women in that space, understand what's going on. When we exit this space, we are going to take on our masks again and go back and be who we're meant to be.
So would you say that this mask in this context is something that allows you to actually uphold the patriarchal structures? Is this something in my mind as a Black feminist that really doesn't work with my form of thinking and living, but I'm just trying to really spell it out. Is it really about putting on this mask to be able to navigate through a patriarchal system? Is it that?
That's what it is, because I think that there has been a weighing of options because they think to themselves, how do we get power? For example, if we go back to the pre-colonial setting where a woman, it's established that you cannot sit on the throne. Now you come into this kind of space. Where is the empowerment for a woman? Are you going to overturn the centuries of this kind of culture? So maybe they just figured out how to maneuver themselves within the patriarchy, as opposed to the complete overt overthrow. Although there are subtle methods of overthrow, like when the king mother, the mother of the king, is actually the one who is setting the policies of the nation, but her son sits on the throne. So that is a subtle way, I think, of also using and manipulating the patriarchy in it without overtly uprooting it.
You also have very intimate examples. I'm not into detail with them now, but I definitely want to invite the readers again to this ebook, to Unmasking Literary Voice from Behind the Mask. I really I think that you have a very specific, very profound example of what that means in a real life setting. Yeah. And at this point, I would like to invite Logan and Olumide back. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, so thank all of you. This is like so amazing. I'm so looking forward to having this publication in my hands and having them all together, these pieces. Um, um, there are 6 authors, but I deliberately chose you 3 for today's first session because in your text, in the forefront, really was the idea or the intersection of gender and sexuality was what was in the forefront. I'm not saying that the other texts don't include it, but this is how I saw your texts connect to each other. Well, obviously Olumide and Logan through your joint piece anyway, but also why I to have in the first conversation. And I do have a question for one of you, but first of all, from the audience, but first of all, I wanted to ask if you have questions to each other, even maybe.
I don't have a question as such, but I'm just really amazed, and thank you for this, Natasha, because the thought process behind it is almost, or it's almost more, bringing more to the forefront than the text itself. So as a writer, this is very rich for me to hear what both of you have gone through. And obviously, Precious, I didn't meet you. With Logan, I spent a little bit of time. So that's quite amazing. So thank you both.
You're
I loved
welcome.
both of you. Yeah.
I did too. I loved all 3 of them. And I have a question from Jefferson to Olumide. Jefferson, also your co-author in the residency. Jefferson, Jamila, and Cherie are in the background in the chat listening to you right alongside the audience as well. So this is a question from Jefferson to Olumide. How do you perceive this type of writing inside the academic environment? In Brazil, because Jefferson's from Brazil, this is not really welcome in academic spaces.
Yeah, I do have a PhD, but I don't really look to the academy. So I'm very much a creative writer, and so I am not in a way concerned about that. So I see it as a text that has some critical or theoretical insertions, and the creative text is much, much longer. So it is really a story with a quote that's kind of going in there. But you do have this genre which is very big, and that's creative nonfiction. So this idea of writing lyrical essays or writing an essay in an interesting way, there's a whole new market for that if you want to. So I think the academy would maybe work with a piece like this to discuss. You can discuss it with your students very well around a certain topic. But if I wasn't publishing it with this piece, I wouldn't necessarily look to the academy for publishing it or for academic publishers. But great question, thank you.
Question to Precious from Cherie. Cherie, yes, also your co-author in ground listening you got to meet last time. Precious, where do you see vibrant womanist or feminist spaces for artists thriving in Ghana? Is her question.
Ghana? Sorry, I don't know much about Ghana. Uganda, maybe?
It says Ghana, but how's the situation in Uganda? It was interesting too.
Okay. In Uganda, there are spaces in which feminists are thriving because there are the subtleties have now become more overt. I don't know if you've heard of the different feminists who have been protesting. For example, Stella Nyanzi. She's also an academician, but then she's also an artist, and she has been using, especially the body, to protest against the containment with which women have been put. in this nation. So I think that artists, especially like her, if going down her very overt feminist manner, can use not just the body, can use language, can use social media. And in these spaces, we can thrive as opposed to just going back into the back rooms of our homes where culture is passed on, and a different kind of feminism, which might be seen as suppressive, is practiced more. So I think the public light allows for this kind of feminism to be more practiced and seen. Yes.
Thank you. I think we've lost Logan. Can you hear us? Your picture's frozen, but can you still hear us? Okay. No worries. I'm going to check the chat. Lara, are there any questions coming from the audience? Yeah. Okay, no questions so far, it says. Sorry, that moment it just popped up. Whoop. Question for Olumide from Sharon. You wrote that when the woman hugged, they were in what do you call them, exclamation marks, not leaning in but bringing less. Sorry, not leaning in but bringing their spaces to one another. Could you speak a little bit more about this evocative image or idea?
Yes. So my idea is that it's a really equal meeting, that nobody is having not power, because I'm not thinking about power there, but nobody is physically, for lack of a better word, dominant is in that moment. So that is just a very neutral. I was thinking about what could be the most neutral way of two people meeting, because I want to upset the narrator without there actually being anything upsetting to observe. It is very, very gentle. Also, I do think the moment is unbearable. So these women meet. The idea is that they're not, nobody's just doing this, nobody's doing that. They're just meeting. It's very gentle. It's perhaps very boring in some ways, but it's very upsetting to the narrator. And I was interested in this idea of stillness, and in a way embodying stillness in these two characters, and this idea of this is maybe the only time that silence is good, because there's a quote in there that silence is a problem almost always. And I think there's times when it's quiet, and their meeting is beautiful and gentle, and that's a silence that's generative, because it means it's quite difficult, as we know. Everybody has probably done these exercises where you have to look at someone, and they're very exposing, and in a way very unmasking, because you have to, if you don't have all these other things like I'm doing now with my hands, if I can't do any of that, if it's just me having to feel what I'm feeling without putting movements to it, it's quite upsetting. So in a way, for me, that's the beauty in those almost enlightened two women who can do that with each other. But the narrator cannot do that at this particular point. In the future, he might. Now gendered them, but in the future, they might or might not do that. But they are sort of beyond all of that, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Jamila has a question for Precious. It is very interesting, the idea you told about feminism in Uganda. Can you please talk more about the idea of feminine and structure of power?
Okay, so I think that the feminine and structure of power has different levels or maybe different contexts, because, for example, in the political arena, and then also, there is a divide. For us being a colonized a nation that was a protectorate of Britain, there is always a pre-colonial, and then there's a post-colonial, because people see it mainly like the West has come and brought in their ideas, and there is a movement to kind of preserve what we had previously. So now the structures of power include, for example, the home life, whereby a woman is seen as being the one who has power there. But a man can easily take it because it's very precarious in the home. Therefore, a woman has to be, in a sense, manipulative to be able to gain more power in the home structures. Now, interestingly, now that we are in a post-colonial Uganda and women are allowed to have, for example, political jobs and political positions, like I have just said, they will meet the president, and this woman, who is a minister of finance, will kneel down for for the president, and then it becomes the juxtaposition is very interesting, because here she has seemingly political power and position, but there is still that idea of gender, and still the idea that this is a man, and therefore, and moreover, a man in power, and therefore you subjugate yourself in a physical manner to him. So the structures are very, very, how can I say, there are multiple structures, multiple areas, I think, that can be looked at. But those are just a few examples. Yes.
I would maybe a last question for today, as our time is running out on us. I would like to take it back into present day reality, maybe my personal reality of Berlin, with all this chaos going out, happening outside on the street. It's as if history is repeating itself right now. After 100 years, we have a new pandemic. We have white on black terror in the streets worldwide, and now specifically from Germany, we have of the right wing and the strengthening of the right wing going on, like it was 100 years ago in the during the Weimar Republic. How do these physical situations play out in each of your individual lives? Olumide, you talked a little bit about it already, and it is reflected in your joint piece through the SARS or the End SARS movement that's going on in Nigeria. But I would like to bring it back into the present stories. How do you think, in which way would they connect to the now, if there is such a thing? Whoever wants to start, the question is really for all three of you.
I could have an attempt at that. I feel like with the collaborative piece with Olumide, the End SARS movement is this really big present political moment. So that definitely sits very well in the present moment. But for my solo piece, I feel like the place I arrived at to be writing this piece is because of the present moment and because of my fear of going anywhere and of basically a fear of the world right now. I think my essay has a line that talks about an age of anxiety, an age of fear. I think that's really what we're living through, and just challenging fascism generally in the Nigerian government is something that has led me to work on this piece. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Oh, Olumide, we can't hear you.
You're muted.
Oh yeah, muted. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, it's perhaps a little similar. I really liked how you phrased it, white on black terror. And I think that's what was really shaking loose. We have this incredible, difficult global moment of the pandemic, but within that, everything else is hyper. Yeah, the only reason, we all were so affected by BLM and SARS and other things is because the news cycle is very reduced. So what I was very concerned with, I mean, I said it before, so I will probably repeat myself, so I keep it very short, is this idea of what came out of BLM uprisings, which were big here too, and which were responded to widely. by every institution in the country sent out their support for Black Lives Matter and made a commitment towards anti-racism. And it was very performative, and it was a mask, and that's what my piece speaks to as well. And it comes in, I briefly mentioned that in the collaborative piece, and it was very, very, very exhausting. That's the part that really floored me, because I'm old enough to know that these are new cycles, that some people are on their way to a new understanding, have opened themselves up, but a lot of it is just because you have to at the moment. And what sort of, I think a lot of us were just very, very exhausted from a lifelong trauma of racism, then these performative masks that every politician and every whatnot were presenting, and still having to navigate this moment that is so difficult on so many different levels. So yeah, I'll leave it at that because I already spoke to it a little bit before.
Thank you. Precious, how do you see it? How's the situation in Uganda at all at the moment? That would be interesting to hear as well, the situation.
I think what has come up, especially during the pandemic, has been the tipping of the scales of power in our understanding here in Uganda. What I mean by this is that we have actually been observers looking at the West and seeing the West being ravaged by something that is just which would usually have been the other way around. And questions have been asked like, why are the Africans not dying? And we all look at each other and we're like, wait a second, aren't we supposed to be the ones dying? But then actually, I'm sorry, I don't want to make light of this, but it's just that it looks like we're in a situation whereby Africa would actually have been the one to have been on the television screens and the numbers rocketing and the graphs just absolutely scary. It seems like it hasn't really affected us in the way that everyone expected it to. So we are beginning to think, or maybe we can actually survive as Africans and thrive in some spaces whereby it has been that usually these things are the ones that are killing us. We are the ones who are spectacles of death, you see, and spectacles of all of these things that come to ravage the world. It always starts in Africa. So I think that has been a very an interesting dynamic to watch. And although we do pray that the world actually restabilizes itself, I think that Africa is learning more about herself, and especially us Ugandans during this time.
Thank you. Well, thank you all, three of you, for today. I'm looking forward to talking to our next three, or your three co-authors, next week. Cherie Renee Thomas from the USA, Jamila Ripa, if I correctly, from Brazil, and Jefferson Tonera, also from Brazil, next week, engaging in similar questions on their pieces that they wrote under the title of Unmasking Difference. I would like the audience like to invite you back to be part of this conversation. Please do not shy away from asking questions, because I think what became really clear or visible today is that writing is a process. It's a creative process. Be part of the process. Be part of this book that you will, I hope, fully read. The book is available online, so it doesn't matter where you're connecting in, where you're linking in. You'll be able to download the same version everybody else around the world will, and it will contain these beautiful pieces from these beautiful spirits, these beautiful minds, who I am more than honored to learn from today. This is all that I can say right now. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Mini applause, my virtual applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so at this point, I will hand back to the LCB to Rose, and I don't know, are you there, Lara?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, then I guess it's up to me to say goodbye. See you on Wednesday, 2 days from now, same time, same space is the place, and talk to you later.